Welcome to Breaking the News Plus. I'm Jana Shortle. Well, the big news in Minnesota today, and certainly in the healthcare world, is the resignation of the CEO of UnitedHealth. While it's surprising on its face, it's a little bit unsurprising because of what's happened at UHC over the last 6 months to a year. And joining me today on Breaking the News Plus is Ron Howrigon, President and CEO of Fulcrum Strategies. Ron has 18 years of experience in this field, and some of his work was with three of the largest managed care companies in the world: Kaiser Permanente, Cigna Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield. So Ron has a very keen eye on what happens with these healthcare companies. Ron, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So Ron, the news today that CEO Witty steps down immediately from UnitedHealth. What was your reaction?
I was surprised because I hadn't heard any rumblings that could happen. But then when you sort of absorb it, you think, well, they've had a really rough year, and definitely a rough last few months, lost a huge amount of the value of their company and stock price. And so, somebody has to be held accountable for that. And obviously it was him.
Is it his fault, all of these things happening at UHC at the same time?
I think blaming a CEO for something is sort of like blaming the president of a country for everything that happens to the economy. It's clearly not all his fault. One person can't control a company that size. But I will tell you that there are a lot of people that were starting to think that, especially I think his reaction when Brian Thompson got murdered, that he just sort of wasn't reading the room well. I mean, a lot of his public comments were almost like, insensitive to the public backlash, and almost like, well, we're doing God's work. Why are people angry with us? So I think the earnings miss on the Medicare Advantage that really made their stock price go down. I think they probably say the board decided that he wasn't the right guy to run this, and went back to the previous CEO, who obviously has experience and they know.
Well, let's start with the beginning of all of the problems. And obviously the murder of Brian Thompson is one we'll get to. But I go back even further to that hack that literally put our U.S. healthcare economy in a standstill. The hack of their healthcare systems on the tech side. That was a big deal.
It was a huge deal. It was a huge deal in how it impacted the delivery of care, how many people were touched by that. And I think, that's a great place to begin. I think that was the first sort of criticisms he got for how he handled it. There wasn't this immediate, we are so sorry, this could have happened to anybody, how do we help? A lot of the delivery of healthcare community, the physicians and hospital, felt like he really sort of turned a deaf ear to it, and didn't take enough ownership of it as an organization. I think that was the first crack in the armor, if you will.
And then a little more than 6 months ago, Brian Thompson murdered on the streets of New York City. And that turns into a global story in and of itself, and the brazen murder. And then the people start speaking up saying, yes, murder is bad, but this healthcare system is broken, and people are furious about it.
Yeah. It's and again, that I think was another thing that they just didn't react well to. No one expected them to say, yeah, we understand why somebody killed Brian. That clearly isn't the case. But there were several of his comments that came out that seemed to be pretty tone deaf to the public backlash against his company. And well, we're trying to help people. We're trying to, so there was no acknowledgement of maybe we can make the system better, and maybe we should take this as a learning experience. That was just another case of him sort of being tone deaf to what was going on, and not reading the room correctly, so to speak.
At the same time, you then have federal investigations, Justice Department investigations into the business practices of UnitedHealth, sort of affirming that backlash, right?
Well, affirming the backlash and starting to shine a light on what most people inside the industry knew, which is this is a organization that's starting to control enough of how healthcare gets delivered that it should cause us concern. That's where a lot of people first learned that UnitedHealthcare owns a bank, and that bank buys patient bad debt that was created by a physician that they own, and an insurance policy that they sold. And I'm not saying that there's something inherently evil or wrong about that. But it's one of those things where people started to go, where there's enough smoke, there's probably fire somewhere. And so that was another thing that I don't think was handled extremely well. They just sort of blew it off and said, well, we're innocent. And they missed a lot of opportunity there to try to change their company and definitely their perception.
And then finally, that one-day stock sell-off, because of the deteriorating results, wiped out $120 billion in their market value.
Yep. And to me, when you look at the timeline, part of the thing to understand here is Wall Street didn't care about the other things, not really. What they cared about was he missed his Medicare earnings, and then they absolutely punished him. And to some degree, one could say the board didn't care about anything until the stock price went down. Prior to that huge sell-off, he could look at his career and say he was incredibly successful. He almost doubled their revenue, in his tenure before the big sell-off, 60% increase in stock price. I mean, there was a reason why he was the highest paid CEO. He was performing on a purely financial perspective. And Wall Street and the board really didn't care about how he reacted to the murder, the investigations, the Change Healthcare thing. What they reacted to was a miss in your earnings. And that to me is telling. It's only about the money. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter, because when it became money, well, then it was unacceptable. Then he's got to go.
And that's really what brings us to today.
Yes, exactly. If he hadn't missed his Medicare earnings, his job would be incredibly secure. And I mean, I worked for a for-profit insurance company, and we knew that our job was to maximize our shareholders' investment. It was the stock price. It wasn't to make friends. It wasn't to improve healthcare. It wasn't to, it was to maximize shareholder investment. And in some degree, some way, that's what for-profit companies are supposed to do. And when you don't do that, you can get sued by your shareholders. I mean, right now there's a lawsuit that's been filed by the shareholders saying that United Healthcare didn't tell them all the things they weren't going to be able to do. And I think one of the lines in the lawsuit is something about that they were no longer going to be able to pursue their anti-consumer behaviors that are required to make earnings. And they're now being sued because they didn't tell the shareholders that, well, we're really not going to be able to be anti-consumer anymore. That's staggering. And it's in the lawsuit filing.
Oh, it always disturbs me hearing these things from you, Ron. And just to be clear, you are saying he could have survived the murder of one of his executives, one of the largest hacks in healthcare history, the investigations by the Justice Department. Those they could have lived with, but they couldn't live with losing that much money.
Nope. They couldn't live with a stock price being that punished, because you've got investors and board members. I mean, I think I calculated with his holdings that one day he lost about $30 million of personal wealth. And you can imagine what board members or other institutional investors, that's not acceptable. The other things we can get away with, as long as it doesn't affect the stock price. Earnings, sorry, that's where we draw the line. And that's really concerning. And the other thing that makes it concerning, because this is the same for a lot of publicly traded companies, the difference is the way you make money with almost every other company, the way you improve your stock price is to do a good thing for your consumers. Apple makes money by producing better phones and better computers and better products. Health insurance in the for-profit world makes money by doing less for your consumers, by denying care, by withholding care. That's why it creates a problem. You don't have a problem with, Apple stock price going up because they made good products. That's how they did it. You have a problem with United and Cigna stock price going up because they did it by doing what we now commonly think of as bad things for the consumer.
One of the things that was noted today, the company said it was seeing medical costs continue to accelerate beyond the trends it flagged last month, and signs that issue was spreading beyond enrollees in its Medicare plans. To me, that reads that, people are using the healthcare too much, so we're losing money.
Yes, that's exactly it. And what's missing there is any comment about or inappropriately using or using when they shouldn't, or, you know what I mean? It's trend, which is something in the industry, it's a prediction of how much more medical expense is going to be next year because of new drugs, new technologies, more sickness, illness, whatever. but they didn't talk about it being inappropriate. Like, well, there are people getting services they shouldn't, or doctors are prescribing drugs that people don't need. They talk about it's just higher than what you thought it was going to be. Well, if it's higher than what you thought it was going to be, but it's all necessary, that's not the fault of the patients. But they've got to control that to get Wall Street back on their side. That's where the rub comes. I was talking to somebody and they said, well, we don't want them to use their insurance because that costs too much money. And I said, but this isn't like taking an extra cupcake at the company picnic. This is nobody jumps up and down and goes, you know what I really want today? There's a lot more chemotherapy. That's what I want for this is healthcare. And if it's all necessary, then it shouldn't be a problem. And it is a problem that to make more money, that their incentives to withhold necessary care. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's a sentence that to me just blatantly says, oh, our customers are using our product too much.
Right. Yeah. Can you imagine walking into an Apple store and saying, I want a laptop, and having them go, wow, you don't need a laptop. What's wrong with your old laptop? I don't want to sell you a laptop. No, if you walk into an Apple store, you say, I want a laptop, they'll be glad to sell you a laptop because that's what you want. But that's what a lot of the patients feel like is, hey, I need this care. No, you don't. You don't need that much care. You don't need that drug. You need a lesser drug. And that's where the disconnect creates. And it's a fundamental problem from economics in that in healthcare, health insurance, the consumer is not the purchaser. The employer or the government is the purchaser. The consumer is the patient. The purchaser, who pays for most of it, is either your employer or the government. And once you disconnect the consumer from the purchaser, you've got all sorts of weird things going on, because the purchaser may not want you to use a lot of healthcare, but the consumer needs it. So, and that's one of those inherent things. So you're right. The sentence says, well, people are using our product too much, and that's how we lose money. You would never see that in almost any other company. If Apple says, you know what, a lot more people bought iPhones, that's a good thing. They like that. And so does the consumer. Healthcare is different.
So a new CEO comes in, and if these are the problems that are flagged with the old CEO, my mind then bends to say, well, the new CEO is going to try to get us to use less healthcare?
Well, so I think two things. One is, I think the first move was probably they had to answer to Wall Street. The earnings miss and the big one-day sell-off, it hasn't bounced back. So clearly the board knows Wall Street wants to see something else. And so, fire the CEO. That's a good move. It's like firing the manager of a baseball team. The second thing is, now what does the new CEO do? That's where we should be really concerned. What are they going to do to try to change this trend of the utilization of healthcare? How are they going to lower cost and deny care? That, to me, is the big question.
But Ron, the customers of UnitedHealthcare, the people who hold the policies, want to be able to use their healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's where we get into the frustration that we all felt after Brian's murder. It gave people a reason or a platform to vent on, I'm frustrated because I need this healthcare. I want this healthcare, and they won't give it to me. And that's the disconnect. So I'm concerned that, the new CEO will come in and go, okay, well, Wall Street's told us what they want. They want less utilization. They want less healthcare delivered. Here's how I'm going to do it. And that can either be done. Healthcare costs, there's only two variables, price and volume. Okay, that's either done by trying to pay doctors and hospitals less for the same services, or authorizing less services, or both. And I think we're likely to see some of both.
It doesn't seem like the patient and consumer ever wind up winning in this situation.
No. And that's the real tragedy to it, is the patient isn't that much part of the equation. And in some ways, the people who need it most are the ones they want the least. And so it's a weird business where you'd actually like some of your consumers to stop using your service. 5% of the US population consumes half of all the healthcare cost. So if UnitedHealthcare can figure out a way to get those 5% so angry with them, they go to somebody else, Wall Street will love them, because you lose 5% of your revenue and 50% of all your cost. You'll be insanely profitable. So the very people who need it the most, not, I'm relatively healthy, you appear to be relatively, not us, but the people who have MS or brittle diabetics or have all these long-term, rheumatoid arthritis. Those are the people who need it the most. And those are the people who have the hardest time getting the care. And if UnitedHealthcare or anyone else can can make some of those people so angry at their policies that they go to someone else. That's a good thing. You wouldn't have any other business who would say, you know what, this company buys more of our computers than anyone else. Boy, we want them to go away. You tailor to them. You want to make them very happy. That's not what happens in health insurance. It's almost reverse of the logic of what we normally think of as a consumer-driven business.
Right. Like Delta rewards its most frequent flyers.
Exactly. They make sure that you get upgrades because you buy more of their product. Can you imagine if you had 1 million miles on Delta and you called and like, God, you again? We don't want you to fly with us. I mean, once you go somewhere else, that's sort of what happens in health insurance.
And health insurance, though, if I'm a frequent flyer, they want me to go over to Blue Cross if I'm at UnitedHealth.
And Blue Cross doesn't want you. And it even gets as crazy as predicted future use. I remember when my company, and I provide insurance for my employees. When I first started, I had to switch insurance companies every 2 or 3 years because I have a son with autism. And as soon as they would find that diagnosis, they would double my insurance premiums to try to get rid of me because of not the services he was getting, but he might get in the future. And so I'd have to switch every 2 or 3 years. And once they picked up the diagnosis, then they would start rating me out.
Can any good come of this?
I'm by nature a bit of an optimist. I hope so. I hope that if there has to be, there was already a murder, that would spark a discussion. Hopefully this will spark a discussion. Hopefully more people will start to say, I posted something on even before this happened about don't hate the player, hate the game. This isn't about, Sir Andrew Witty. I don't know the man. He might be a really nice guy. He's obviously very smart. He's playing the game that's been designed for him, just like Cordani at Cigna is, just like everybody else is. All right, then let's change the game. And maybe this is a good example of saying, boy, this is what happens when the rules of the game, let's change it. Let's make the rules different. But for-profit company behavior will follow whatever is in their best interest. We've just made it in their best interest to do bad things. If you reverse it, can you imagine if they got a tax break for the average satisfaction of their patients? Change what they did. Then there would be a financial incentive for them to please people rather than try to get rid of them. So hopefully it can spark a discussion and change the game.
Well, that's why we host these conversations. Ron, I appreciate you talking with us about this today and always about the nature of healthcare or lack thereof in our country. We'll talk to you again next time. Thank you, Ron. This has been Jana Shortle for Breaking the News Plus.